Hey guys, this is CJ Lowry with Eukolos, and I just wanted to give a quick overview. I know a lot of you probably have either already heard it or this data, or somebody has been trying to tell you about it, but I just kind of want to go over a few things. Feel free to tweet us here at Eukolos Easy, Eukolos_easy. Good way to get a hold of us. Obviously, my email is Lowry, Lowery, at eukolos.org. So the first thing we want to do is just kind of explain, maybe what you are seeing in traditional data. Oftentimes, people say, "Oh, well, I'm going to disaggregate your data for you, and I'm going to compare apples to apples." Um, and when we do that, what we do is we say, "Oh, okay, well, like my business partner Alan, who was teaching ESL kids, and here you can see that his group of ESL kids, he teaches sheltered ESL class. His group of sheltered ESL kids was quite a bit lower than the rest of the district, and so traditionally he was told, hey, your numbers are lower. And the same thing with GT. Why are your numbers so low? And in his mind, he's thinking, well, I'm getting my distinctions. We're number 1 or 2 in the group of 40 every 3 or 4 years. So really, he was like, man, I need drastic change because everyone told him you're comparing apples to apples, and we know that within an ESL classroom or even within a GT classroom, there's lots of different kinds of apples. So metaphorically, we're using this apple to describe the students. And even though they're all labeled the same, they're all apples, we know that there's different types, flavors, and colors of all those ESL or those apples. Same thing considering the GT kid. So what he says is, man, we got to dig deeper into the data. And so, hopefully you guys throughout this will see that we're really trying to look a little bit deeper into the data and just get off of that skimming the surface and really dig deep. And so what he did is he said, you know what, here's what I'm going to do. Sure, the label matters, and it matters that you're ESL, but maybe it's more important to compare you to like academic kids. And so how do we define a like academic kid? What we do is we take three things. We take their historical testing data, we take their demographic data, and we took their Lexile score and said, okay, well, let's create a profile for each kid in the district. And so what we did is we took one of his students, and we took that student and compared it to all the like students throughout the school district. And so what we then did is we said, okay, well, what were their average test scores? And you can see this was an ESL student, and like students and this student were both pretty low. And again, how do you celebrate a 50? Well, looking at this here, the district average for the same type kid that was in Mr. Lohman's class was getting a 45, and his student got a 50. So we say that similar kids, he's adding 5 more points of value just because they're sitting in his classroom. And so he said, okay, well, let's do that with another kid, maybe a little higher level. And so we compared a little bit higher level to all similar kids to him. And as you can see here, the average was a 78, and this student had an 84. So just by being in Alan Lohman's class, Alan was adding 6 points of value that the other kids that with similar abilities and similar academic profiles were not getting. And so then he did this for all the students, and across the board, on average, he was adding 6 points of value to these students. Now, so we continue to say, oh, we're making data-driven decisions, we're making data-driven decisions, and we just showed you that this data that was showing that his ESL scores on the surface looked to be lower. Really, the case is they weren't comparing true apples to apples. They were just saying ESL to ESL when really we knew there was more to the ESL. So when he compared Granny Smith apples to Granny Smith apples, given the level of ESL kid in his class, he was actually having great success. And it wasn't that he needed drastic change, having success. And he was actually first in the district with his ESL kids. The difference is they were walking into his class starting out at a lower level than maybe they were walking into other levels. And the same thing with the GT. This other school was doing really well with them. But what we can see there is that he was having great success even with his GT students. They were just coming in at a lower level. So how do we explain that? So let's look at this information here. This would be traditional data. And we would look at this and we'd say, okay, your third grade reading team in your district or in your school. And you'd say, well, your best teacher is Miss Knott. And your teachers down here that have the most room for improvement are Covey and Driver. And you're sitting in your seat saying, man, maybe I'm the Covey and Driver, and thinking, man, I'm that teacher that's always a little bit on that lower level, but I know that they're putting the tougher kids in my class, or they're putting the kids with special needs, or they're putting the kids that are ESL, or just the kids that maybe are coming in a little bit lower because whatever was happening at home, or maybe they missed some schooling for whatever reason. Well, when we look at this, we want to look at it on a regression line. So if you're familiar with regression lines, up here is the R squared value. And what the R squared value does is it tells you what percent this graph explains of the variance. So this line here is the regression line, which naturally is going to have points above and below the line because the line is the line of best fit, aka a regression line. And this line explains 93% of the variance between the dots and the lines, meaning it's about 93% accurate. So that's how you know that our data is accurate. Is any data perfect? No. But we're hoping that you see that this data has less imperfections than maybe what we're using traditionally that isn't showing the growth in our students as accurately. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing that Miss Driver, we're no longer worried that she only scored a 79. We're worried that look how far above the line she is. Versus Miss Stover, her overall score was higher, but you can see she's below the line, meaning she started with higher kids and they actually underperformed. Miss Knott started with very similar kids to Miss Stover because they would cross the regression line at the same place, but she actually overperformed. And as you know, sometimes it can be very difficult to take high kids higher. So, but the thing is you want to look at Miss Driver here and you can see similar kids to who were in her class were actually scoring about a 75. She scored a 79. So as you can see down here on the bottom, she was 4 points above. Miss Knott, 1 point above, who was about a point above where she crossed, and Miss Stover about 2 points below where similar kids in the district were scoring to her. So that's where we get your numbers here, which is your Eukolos number. That's the difference of where you actually scored as a teacher or as a student and where students like you scored across the district. So then when we give this same traditional data here, Miss Knott, you can see is at the top, Miss Driver at the bottom. When we flip it, we show you, given the level of kid they started with, where did they end up? So Miss Driver was actually adding almost 4 points of value to each one of her students on average just because they were in her class, because she was building those relationships, had tightly aligned TEKs, maybe was really using her PLC and using those around her. And what you can see is Miss Solis and Miss Knott and Miss Parker, we're still getting good numbers. Miss Knott and Miss Solis would be considered a 1. Miss Parker and Miss Covey, we'd consider both of them a 0, which means they're getting what they should. And Miss Hartz and Miss Stover, they're the ones that underachieved. Now, if you underachieved, we're not worried about you underachieving. We would be worried if you continued to underachieve. What we want to know is we want to say, okay, now Miss Stover, Miss Hartz, what's your next steps? Okay, and so that's where our data is going to really dive in, and you're going to get a report. You should be seeing reports like this that it was either sent directly to you or through your administrators. And so this is some fake data here, and what we see is we see these 3 elementary schools. And real quickly, you can see, well, which one is being the most effective given their level of kid. Now, I want to let you know, we're taking out the excuse, oh, they have all the high students, or of course, they have all the low students, so it's easier for them to grow. This is not about testing from one test to a second test. It's actually only showing you, did you overperform or underperform on this test? So it's not showing growth. Instead, it's actually showing where you could grow. So where did you underperform or overperform? Where could you grow, or where did you overachieve? So when we dive into this, you can see that the school that underachieved the most would be Bradfield. And again, we're not worried about what their score was. We're worried about did they underachieve or overachieve? So when we click in, what's really cool here is we want to show you the frequency of the TEK, the actual TEK, the item number, and then the teacher. So you can see here that it's not actually the whole school that underachieved, because Miss Rogers actually overachieved on average by 3, Miss Ellis underachieved by 5. So you can see that it's really this one teacher that overall needs to grow. But the first thing that we want to celebrate is where can Miss Ellis lead? So if we sort this largest to smallest, you can see here there are 3 standards that she outperformed other students within the district by this many points. And you'll notice they're all the same TEK, 5.4, 5.4, and she can help Miss Rogers. Versus if we go smallest to largest, this is an area in the 6 highly tested TEKs that this teacher can grow. So the further you are off from 0, it should be the easier growth. And now we can show you where can you go to get your help. Well, next door to Miss Rogers, who really overachieved.